What's up, YouTube? Capital G here. Got two new cards coming out of Extreme Force to talk about. We got ourselves a new hand trap and a new spell speed 3 counter trap. I don't know about you guys, but anytime a new counter trap is introduced into the game, I get pretty excited. I've always liked the design of counter traps, how they directly respond to your opponent's actions. And I don't know, counter traps just are very empowering. Even the early days of DM, I always kind of gravitated towards counter traps, the Solemn Judgments, Magic Jammer, 7 Tools of the Bandit, especially Curse of Anubis. Like, I like the fact that your opponent thinks that they're going to do something and you're like, hold up, I'm just going to stop that, completely wreck your game plan. Then we have ourselves a new hand trap that I think an effect like this was going to come eventually in the Vrains era, just because card placement is so important right now. So let's go ahead and start with the hand trap. It's called Electronic Transmulation Watkiness. That is a mouthful to say, and I'm not going to say it again. It's a light psychic effect monster, level 4, 1800 attack, 0 defense. Very important, quick effect. You can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard. That is super important. Then target one monster your opponent controls. Move it to another of your opponent's available main monster zones. Okay, so the fact that you can use this guy from the field is pretty important because this definitely has the stat line and kind of just the synergy, it being level 4 with so many other cards in the game, exceed plays, etc, etc. It has the chops for you to summon this, potentially beat your opponent down, and then if they summon like an extra deck monster, maybe like a link monster that's very important to them, you might be able to use its effect. If it's not useful, then maybe exceed with it or just try and beat them down. I looked at it at first and I was like, wow, this is a completely useless effect, but I don't think it's completely useless. I think that there are a couple of very niche applications. I think that this is supposed to be a card to disrupt your opponent's link strategies, because I was thinking about it, right? Now I saw this somewhere online. I think it may have been on the Yu-Gi-Oh Reddit or somewhere else, right? So let's say your opponent summons the double helix, right? This is generally the first card that the spiral deck will go into, and it's because if you look at the link arrows, they point down, obviously, so it can kind of open up your opponent's field, and they can just kind of, create the extra link, and they can vomit link monsters all over the board. Let's say that you used your Kiness, and you just move this guy to the leftmost monster zone. Your opponent would be in a very bad situation because their double helix would now have its cursors kind of irrelevant. I mean, obviously, it would mean there's no more zones towards the left, and it can't summon anything, below it, because that's the spell and trap zone. So, you might have actually disrupted their play, and it might hinder them, and there's probably going to be other situations. Now, with that said, I'm thinking that this is only going to be useful against link strategies, and it seems like you kind of have to wait for your opponent to commit to a link monster for Watkiness to actually be effective. But, if the meta is going to be like decks like Spirals, and when we get the Link Vrains pack, Konami is supposed to be supporting a ton of archetypes with Link monsters. If Konami is really going to make sure that the next 3 years of Yu-Gi-Oh, or the Vrains era, is pretty much Link City, much like how Zexal was Exceed City, then this card actually might become very useful. It just depends on how much of a impact the Link summon or Link monsters are ultimately going to have in the game. And right now it's looking like they're going to have a very big impact. I don't expect Konami to release a whole bunch of like amazing tribute summon decks during this era and Exceed decks and Synchro, etc, etc. Then we have a counter trap that I forget exactly who this guy is, and YG Organization has this nice picture of him right here. I swear, obviously it's a Yu-Gi-Oh card, but I have no idea. At first I thought it was like Grandmaster of the Sixth Samurai, or I thought it was Freed, the Matchless General, or one of his like older, well, no, I guess he's like, that's like the oldest form of him. Freed's in like a billion cards, but I was like, no, I don't think that that's him. It must be like Martial Arts Master or something, because he's fighting Legendary Jiu-Jitsu Master. I remember him because people used to play him like way back in the day. But anyways, counter trap, it's called Critical Timing, I believe. Yes, Critical Timing, counter trap. When your opponent activates a spell / trap card or monster effect with the same name as a card in the graveyard, negate that activation, and if you do, destroy it. So to me, this card is super duper niche. I mean, there may be situations where your opponent is playing a certain card, maybe even a bunch of different cards at like 2s and 3s, things like Card of Demise, the pot cards, Duality, Desires, although I don't really know that people want to use multiple Desires in a duel, Galaxy Cyclone, Twin Twisters. You know, in the mid game, it could be kind of useful for activate or for stopping spells and traps, but it is obviously not really an early game card. And this is important to note. When it says you can negate, when it says your opponent activates a spell or trap card, it does not include the effects of those spells and traps. So your opponent has to actually activate it like from the hand onto the field, or they have to like flip over a Zodiac Barrage or something like that. You cannot use this to stop things like when a rank up to 7th one activates in the hand, or if your opponent wants to use like a breakthrough skill from the graveyard, this cannot stop like Paleozoic monsters from summoning themselves back into the grave or from the grave, because that is the spell and trap effects, and this only covers monster effects. Now, with that said, I do think that this card does have some pretty decent applications for monster effects. I could be wrong about this, but I think that this does stop every monster effect that activates in the graveyard. Let's say that I run over your Witch of the Black Forest, right? And your Witch says, all right, I'm in the graveyard, I want to activate. Since they're trying to activate an effect and there is a copy of Witch in the graveyard, I believe you should be able to negate that. If it's ruled that there has to be an additional copy, that's really going to hurt this card. But even in that case, I think that you can still stop hand traps with this. Think of things like Ghost Ogre or Ash Blossom or Maxi, Effect Veiler. Almost all the big hand traps, the ones that see competitive play, they send themselves to the graveyard from the hand as cost, which means that the second your opponent activates them, before you even get a chance to respond to that, whether it be with a Solemn Strike or any counter trap, obviously in this case it would be Critical Timing, that card is already in the graveyard. So let's say your opponent is using Maxi or Ash Forehead, you're responding to the effect of Ash Forehead. Ash Forehead is already in the graveyard before you flipped over your counter trap, which means that they have the card's name is in the graveyard. So it should be able to negate any hand trap that is a cost to send itself to the graveyard, which most of the meta ones, I haven't looked up Joel and Lopper, but I'm pretty sure it's a cost anyway. The problem is, if you want to play a card that just stops like graveyard effects and that just stops hand traps, pretty sure you could just run Debunk instead, and it just seems like a lot more practical. So we'll have to see exactly how this card is going to be ruled. If it does stop all monster effects that kind of activate in the graveyard, Sangans and, you know, things like Rodent Toad and etc., that will be kind of important, and it'll give this card a little bit of power. But overall, I probably wouldn't play this card. It just seems a little too situational. If you're really looking to stop hand traps in graveyards, just play Debunk. Anyways, let me know what you guys think. Maybe you don't agree. That's perfectly fine. Let me know why in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on those notifications for daily videos.